Good morning, everybody in the world of YouTube. I want to just check my microphone, make sure. Okay. So we're doing Q&A today, and we're taking the preferentially questions from our Discord. The link is in the description below. Once we run out of those, we can curate some questions from the live chat via the YouTube. So let's see what we got here on Discord. Jagadish asks, why are six, 8, and 12 houses dreaded? Lots of bad yogas are indicated when other house lords are placed in these tricky. You know what would be kind of cool? Let's see if I can do this quickly enough. If I could. 6, 8, 12. Kind of like put, you see that? Put a note of what the question is all about. So why are 6, 8, and 12 houses dreaded? A lot of bad yogas are indicated when other house lords are placed in these trick houses. Trick is such a cool word, doesn't it? It sounds like tricky, but in Hindi it's 3 triplicate. What are the counterbalancing forces in the chart which will help you in navigating 8th and 12th house energy? Alright, so 2 or 3 questions? So the first one is, why are 6th, 8th, and 12th houses dreaded? Well, why not? I mean, my answer is why not? You got to have some houses that are dreaded. Do you not? Because you want astrology to be realistic, right? Or do you want it to be a relaxation session? If you want it to be a relaxation session, then you have to sugarcoat everything. But if you want it to be realistic and practical, then there's got to be something in the chart that's dreaded. Because there's stuff in our lives that are dreaded. I mean, even the happiest person has at least a few negative events in their life, right? So where do those come from if you don't have dreaded things? So there's got to be a couple of dreaded houses. So there's 3. Why is it 6, 8, and 12 and not 1, 5, and 9? Right? That's because of the physical characteristics of what 6, 8, and 12 are. So 8 and 12. First of all, you should know what the houses are. Like physically what they are, astronomically what they are. The houses are the 12 divisions of the sky, not in reference to the solstices, but in references to the horizons. In reference to the horizons. Not in reference to equinoxes, but in reference to horizons. The signs of the 12 areas of the sky in reference to equinoxes. The houses are the same 12 references. Same 12 areas of the sky, but in reference to your horizon. So the first sign is the eastern horizon, and then you go counterclockwise from there. Second is below it, third is below it, fourth is right underneath you. Fifth starts to head west below you, sixth is below the western horizon, 7 is the western horizon, 10 is way up above you. So once you know physically what the houses are, astronomically what the houses are, then the symbolism of those houses in astrology just makes sense. It's just a physical reality of what the houses are. The 8th and the 12th houses are where the sun obscures vision, where the sun acts against its own nature. The nature of the sun is to make things visible. But when the sun is at these very oblique angles to the horizon, 8 and 12, it hurts our eyes. We walk around like this, we go like this, we wear sunglasses, we pull the visor down on the car, we put on a hat so that you can see. So the sun is blinding when it's in 8 or 12. 12 is that blinding nissa from the sun that's right after sunrise, and 8 is that blindingness that's right before sunset. and therefore it symbolizes things that are difficult and come out of nowhere. They come unseen. Things that we don't see. That's the nature of the 8th and the 12th house. So it's not necessary that they're difficult houses, but they tend to be difficult houses because they tend to represent stuff you don't know about, stuff you can't see, and stuff that makes things kind of uncomfortable for you. So that explains 8 and 12. And then 6. Why 6 joins the pack? It's the area of sky that's below the horizon. 6 and 2 are mirrors of 8 and 12. 8 and 12 are the areas of sky that are right above the horizons, and 6 and 2 are the areas of sky that are right below the horizons. But 2 is opposite in its nature to 8, because 2 is under the eastern horizon, to 6, and also to 8 in another way. Because 2 is under the eastern horizon and 6 is under the western horizon. So the nature of the houses above the horizon, 8 and 12, is that they obscure what the horizon symbolizes. But the nature of the houses below the horizon is that they uphold what the horizon symbolizes. Below upholds, above obscures. Okay? So 6 would uphold what the western horizon symbolizes, and 2 will uphold what the eastern horizon symbolizes. So the eastern horizon symbolizes self and birth. So the second symbolizes family, mother, father, health, strength, money, resources, everything that upholds the physicality. Whereas the 6th, it's upholding the west. West symbolizes sunset, death, disappearance, other people. So 6, you have people working for others. You have yourself working for others, benefiting others. You have things which support death. You have disease, sickness, etc., signified by the 6th. So the full answer to your question, to summarize, why is 6, 8, and 12 dreaded houses? Because somebody's got to be a dreaded house, because there's dreaded stuff in the world that astrology represents. Why is it particularly 6, 8, and 12 and not some other houses? Because the obscuring nature of 8 and 12 gives that sense of unknown, difficulties, and 6 is supportive of west, which is sunset, endings, etc. Righty? Next one. Next part of this question. What are the counterbalancing forces in the chart which help you? A lot of bad yogas are indicated when other house lords are placed in these trick houses. No, actually, no. He's asking, do a lot of bad things? Is a lot of bad stuff indicated when planets occupy these 3 houses? Not so much. The lords of the houses are more detrimental than the houses themselves in almost all cases. So really, it's where you see, for example, 12 and 8 mixing, 12 and 6, 12th lord, 6th lord mixing, 8th lord, 6th lord mixing. Outside of those 3 houses, that's where they cause trouble. If you see that mixing within their own houses is actually good. Okay? And he wants to know counterbalancing forces. Well, how can you deal with these houses? You deal with everything in life the same way. It's by being brave and being honest and being simple. Be like Johnny Depp in that trial. Just be open. You just look, there's dreaded things in life. You deal with them. And you try to get to know them, and you just be open with them. Just be real with them. That's how you deal with difficulties. Once you're hating the difficulties, you spend more than you spend 90% of your time trying to avoid them. Once you stop hating the troubles, then instead of trying to avoid it, you actually work on the trouble. Alrighty, that is Jagdish's question. Next we have a question from Mudit. Is fatalism an escape from self-improvement? So he's asking, is the concept that there's no free will just a way to escape from self-improvement. It is actually, isn't it? Is there anything else to say about that? I mean, it's a very good observation, and all I can say is I approve. Rubber stamp. Imdylo, IMDYLO, asks, in the past video you mentioned that a native with the 7th Lord in the 7th is at a disadvantage to form partnerships. So in the past video I said that if you have the 7th Lord in the 7th house is disadvantageous to forming partnerships. Could you explain why this is the case? I actually think I did explain it right there, but let's do it again. Shouldn't it be the opposite, since all the qualities of the house should be preserved by the virtue of the Lord sitting in its own place? So it's a good question, although I think I've answered it already, since it's such an obviously good question. The general principle is, if the Lord of the house occupies the house, then the house prospers. For example, 6th Lord in the 6th house. It's good for the 6th house. The 6th house will prosper. It means you won't have troubles from it. 8th Lord in the 8th house, you won't get troubles from the 8th house. 12th Lord in the 12th house, etc. The general principle is that the Lord of the house in the house makes the house beneficial. Now, there's one interesting exception to the rule. It's the 7th house. And Imdelo wants to know why. Well, it's because the 7th... So, it's not that everything about the 7th house isn't benefited from having its Lord. Some of the stuff about the 7th house is benefited from having its own Lord in it. But mostly what we think about when we talk about the 7th house, most of the reasons why we look at it, etc., is because of marriage and partnerships. Well, how do partnerships fare when you stay in your own house? Hello? You can't meet people when you stay where you are. To meet somebody, you have to go out. Right? So, 7th Lord staying in its own house makes it slower to find a suitable partner, on the basis that the 7th Lord needs to go somewhere to connect with somebody. You understand? That's why the classics say 7th Lord in the 7th house is it takes a delay in finding a marriage partner. I also would add to that 7 to 2 is a little bit slow, because who is the 7th Lord going to? People you already know, family. 7 to 4 is also a little bit slow for the same reason. Okay? I think that answers your question. It doesn't mean that it's not good, though. It just means that it's slower. Soundarya asks, can you talk about the origin? Oh boy, I forgot to change my picture, my text, right? So let's say Nakshat. Let's just change it now. Y27. Could you talk about the origin of the nakshatra and why there are 27 divisions? I read that the lunar cycle is 27.3 days and that the moon takes 27.3 days to complete one orbit around the Earth. Is that why there are 27 divisions? You got it. For each day of the moon cycle, does that explain why the moon is Rikshraj? It does indeed. So let me just explain this in my own Victikara way. The origin of nakshatras is simple. When we do astrology, we are reading the sky. So how do you read this? What are you reading when you read the sky? You're reading a timestamp. Because time is known by movement, change of things. And it's the movement of the planets that's the easiest and most universal way to comprehend the progress of time. And time delivers results. That's why the condition of the positions of the time indicators indicates the condition of the results. So there are various ways to make sense of what you see when you look at the sky. The simplest way is to look at the sky at night, because there's a lot of stars at night, and those stars are very handy. Why are they handy? Because they as a unit, they change their position in relation to the horizons. And as a unit, they change the other thing. There's these other 7 dots or 5 dots that move around. 5 dots plus the sun and the moon that move around in relation to the rest of the stars. And the easy thing about looking at the sky at night is that you can see it fairly easy. You don't need calculators to get the basics of it. So this is a very primal system, a very easy primal system of making sense of the sky, is to look at it at night, see how things have changed in relation to the things that have not changed. Do you know what the word nakshatra means? Na means no. Na means no. And kshaya means to change, to fall away, to decay. Nakshaya, something that does not change. Nakshatra, the stuff that doesn't change. The things which are unchangeable. So, the word nakshatra means the points that stay put in the things that keep the Big Dipper. It's always the Big Dipper. It never changes. Orion is always Orion. That's why they're called nakshatra. Versus the planets, which are called grihana or graha. They move. They have independence. So this is the origin of the nakshatra. It's a way to place the planets in different, to understand, to notice the change of the planets, and thereby to understand the passage of time. Now, the reason why why are there 27 star units? And that's the reason that you mentioned. It's actually the same reason why there's 12 zodiac signs. The zodiac, on the other hand, it's not different than the nakshatra in its concept. It's the same concept. The concept is to notice the movement of the planets and be able to describe the movement of the planets, and therefore the state of the time, and therefore the nature of the destiny. But the solar one requires more abstraction, because the sun obscures the rest of the stuff because it's so bright. So the solar divisions are based on observing the amount of light and darkness that's active on a given day, or the distance of the amount of shadow versus the amount of light that's happening on a given day. And from that, you know the position of the sun, and then from the position of things in relation to the sun, you know where they are. And so the reason why there's 12 divisions of that is because in one circuit of light and darkness, like from the longest day to the next longest day, or from the longest night to the next longest night, from one solstice to the next, from one solstice to the same, you see, it's in that amount of time, which we call 1 year. In that 1 year, the moon will do a similar orbit, like an identical orbit. It will go around us in the sky 12 times. Tight, more or less. 12 point whatever. So that's why we have 12 segments. And just as you have that interplay between the sun and moon to form the 12 segments of the solar zodiac, you also have that same interplay of the sun and the moon to form the 27 segments of the nighttime zodiac, of the nighttime sky. So the solar zodiac is like the daytime sky, and the lunar zodiac, which shouldn't really be called a zodiac, it's confusing. The lunar sky, the solar sky is the daytime sky, and the lunar sky is the nighttime sky. The same interaction that creates 12 divisions in the solar sky is the same thing that creates 27 in the lunar sky. So in the amount of time that it takes the moon to go around one orbit, the sun does 27 and something, 0.3 you say. 27, but how can the sun do 27 if it does one, if the sun makes one loop? Look, if this is confusing, just look at your clock. The fat hand, the small hand is the sun, and the long hand is the moon. That's exactly the motion. It's just modeled on that motion. So the moon goes around, that long hand goes around once, and that amount of distance that the big hand travels, that's 30 degrees. That's one segment of the zodiac. Okay, now, how then can the sun move around 27 times per hour? Right? So it would have to be like a third hand. It's not quite the second hand, but it would be something that completes an orbit 27 times per minute. 27 times per hour. So it's like 2 minutes-ish. That's the sunrises in the sunrise cycle. The one orbit of the sun, which is represented on the clock by the big hand on the clock, is the sun's yearly movement. But if we translate to the moon as the basis, and we say within the course of one's moon orbit, then how many times does the sun go around in there? Well, 0, right? Or point something. No, because the sun is also doing a daily quick motion. So the daily quick motion within one lunar orbit is 27. So that makes 27 unique slices. And then we say, well, there's this kind of star in this one slice, and that kind of stuff. But that's more advanced. That's more sophisticated than the basic primal astrology is just look with your eye. You know, it's by the red star today. But you can't get very precise with that. So the more sophisticated or evolved astrology uses mathematics also for the lunar zodiac. So like the solar zodiac, they abstracted and they divided into these precise divisions conceptually. And say there's 27 of them, and they're 13 in the third degree each. And that's how you get to 27. Nakshatras, did that make sense? I hope it made sense because it makes total sense, but I hope I didn't explain it wrongly. And Riksharaj means Lord of the Nakshatras. That's why, because the moon created the Nakshatras. Just like the sun is the Rashi Raj, the moon is the Riksharaj, Nakshatra Raj. Mercurius asks, I have been wanting to ask this about this question of the seventh Lord. Oh. So he also wanted to know about seventh Lord and seventh house. Stephanie asks, Ms. King, this is a request and a question. I admit this is only for individuals like myself who are astro geeks. I love the books I have purchased from you. Thank you. And I noticed the date and location of the book was printed. I noticed that, sorry for all the burping or whatever it is. And I noticed that the date and location that the book was printed appears on one of the last pages of the book. Wondering if the publisher has the ability to include the time as well. I know this is extra, but I think it would be neat to look at the transits for the time the book. It would be neat. You have the date and the place, right? But I don't do it. Amazon does it. And, they don't think they're going to take a request from me. Ashutosh asks, what about the milk we get from the dairy industry? Some say it's equally sinful as eating meat, as animals live in a miserable condition in a farm. Their calves are taken away from them, etc., etc. What's your take on it? So some say it's equally sinful as eating meat. Well, that point is the point there's the flaw in the logic. It's not equally bad as drinking milk is not equally bad as eating beef. That actually just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, 100 is a positive number, and 10 is also a positive number. So in that sense, 100 and a 10 are the same, because they're both positive numbers. Similarly, negative 100 and negative 10 are both negative numbers. And so they're equal in that sense that they're both negative. But, I mean, who would think that minus 100 is the same as minus 10? If you are $100,000 in debt, it's a lot different than being $10,000 in debt. In both cases, you're in debt, right? So that's the problem. It is not equally bad. And if you insist, or if somebody insists that it is equally bad, because absolute's absolute and anything negative is negative, then how about the pain caused to broccoli when you pluck it out of the ground? Or how about the injustice to the fruit seeds when you eat their food that's supposed to nourish them? So, if minus 10 is the same as minus 100, then minus 1 has got to be the same as minus 10. And minus 1/10 has got to be the same as minus 1. And so, therefore, eating a potato must be the same as killing your mother. So there is no sensibility to that. That's illogical. And how I feel about this issue is a person should try to be the best person they can be. And you gradually find out what your limits are and what you're capable of in the long term. The most important thing really to being a good person is to being a progressive person. There is no absolute good. There's progression, and progression is good. If you decide that drinking milk is the same as eating meat, and therefore you're not going to drink milk, and then you think that your journey to righteousness is complete, then you're bad, because you stop progressing. The more important thing is to keep progressing gradually, day by day, month by month, year by year. Keep improving. If you realize that that violence is bad, then really the first step is to make sure that you're not violent to humans, especially to people who love you and help you and take care of you. And then even to your enemies. That's a very important step, right? And then to innocents. Or maybe the innocents should come first. The enemies are a little bit more difficult. Innocent people like animals. So you gradually can improve your nonviolence. And so ultimately, is it an ideal that one would not drink milk from factories where the cows are being bred for beef? Yes, definitely. Certainly. But is it the same as eating meat? No, that's insane. You must be an insane person to think that or say that. Okay. Now, next question. I forgot to update my... See, so this isn't really working. Well, maybe I can get used to it. So Sandy asks, I would like to know your interpretation of the current full moon. Okay, let's do that. Current full moon. I think it's a half moon right now. I don't know what you mean, but maybe you meant the next one or the previous one. I don't know. I would like to know your interpretation of the current full moon and its close proximity to Zatan. Well, let me take a look at it. Uno momento. What do I see here? I see that currently K2 is coming upon my horizon. No, I'm sorry. This is for Iowa. For some dumb reason, the software developer must be based in Iowa. Let me just change this. Birth data. Japan. Wow. Is that today? Yeah, look at that. So somehow K2 is like exactly rising right now for me. Anyway, that's not too important to your question. Mars is within the same sign as K2, which is not very pleasant, but at least it's not particularly close. They are converging upon each other. So at some point within the next couple of months, K2 and Mars are going to be together, which is not the friendliest, most pleasant thing. You have an exalted Mercury quite far from the sun, so Mercury is doing well right now, although it's retrograde, but who cares? You have Venus in Leo. And you have Jupiter in Taurus and Saturn retrogressing Pisces. So this person is, I see it's approaching a new moon, isn't it? So why don't we forward this so that it gets to the new moon, and then I'll see what's up. So tomorrow, nope. Next day, yes. Closer than it looks, isn't it? Just a second, I want to get it to be... Well, what would be a full moon? It would be 6 degrees of Pisces. When the moon is 7 or 8 degrees of Pisces, it'll be a full moon. Hey. I don't know why I'm a perfectionist, but I am. So hang on a second. Sorry to keep you all waiting. YouTube will probably send me a note that this is not a good... Okay, so it's looking like 5 o'clock in the morning, my time on the 31st. It's the full moon. Well, what is my interpretation of it? It's a full moon in Pisces with Saturn retrograde, while Venus is retrograde in Leo. And Libra has K2 and Mars, so the saving grace of it is that Mercury is exalted with Jupiter's aspect. So how do you make an interpretation of that? You say it's emotional dissatisfaction, right? Because the moon in Pisces with Saturn is definitely emotional dissatisfaction. Kind of in the sense of emotional dieting, or a desire for emotional dieting, wanting to reduce your emotional activity, wishing you could reduce your emotional activity, getting some distance, or trying out some cold shoulderiness towards things that have been troubling you. And probably because of Venus retrograde in Leo with K2 and Mars in Libra, probably for most people it's going to come as a result of the relationships, like re-evaluating the relationships, especially romantic relationships for most people, or sexual relationships, pleasure relationships, re-evaluating the emotional worth of those in light of a clearer or better informed intellect. That's the nature of this upcoming moon. That's what it's good for, and also what's difficult about it. Obviously, depending on how those... Obviously, different people, even listening to this right now, will tune in or tune out to that in different ways because of how your chart is configured for this sort of topic and also for this moon. Okay, that's enough of that. Look at that. You got me to do a live moon reading. That's so not me. Okay, let's see what the next question is. Pika asks, where's the realm of the Nagas, and can one be reborn there too? Okay, 1 second. I gotta change the title. Nagalok. Where's the realm of the Nagas? And can one be reborn? So Nagas is called Bila Swarga. There's 3 Swargas. This topic is coming now in our Bhagavatam stream. As we are in chapter 17 of Canto 5, we'll begin to learn about 3 types of Swarga. Generally, when people think of Swarga, they think of nakshatras. So they think of some kind of celestial realm. But there's also Bhoma Swarga or Bhu Swargas. Swargas that are earthly paradises. And there are also Bila Swargas, subterranean paradises. So the Nagaloka is in Bila Swarga, which also implies that you need to go into the ground to get there. But it doesn't mean that the Nagas are living in the ground. But the access from Bhu to their Loka is by entering the ground. So where is it? It's the Bhagavad and the Vedas has a concept of space which would explain the dark matter problem, and actually mathematically comes pretty close to the same number. The dark matter theory estimates that we have access to about 5% of the mass that's supposed to be in the universe, whereas the Vedas come to 3% or 2.9. That's in the book I just published, which is in the 16th chapter of the Bhagavatam, which is called It Actually Makes Sense, Astronomy of Srimad Bhagavatam. I just published it. You can get it from my site, victikara.com. Go over to books. So the Vedic idea of space is that there are phases to it, or I guess it's maybe New Agey, but you could say higher dimensions, lower dimensions to it. You have to have a certain type of sensory capacity to experience different aspects of it. And those with a fully developed sensory capacity experience 100% of the mass and the content of the universe, and those with humans experience about 3 to 5%, and those below humans less. So Nagaloka is not a place that you can locate in the solar system, galaxy, universe, etc., that we see with our eyes. There's a way to traverse from this place to that place if you have capacity to adjust, to tune your sensory capacity to it. But from the perspective of those who perceive 100% of the cosmos, the Nagaloka is below the Bhuloka. The Bhuloka is in the middle with the sun. But Nagaloka is below that plane, and it's shielded from the sun. There's no sunlight there. But there's jewels. So really the nature of Nagaloka is... The astronomy of Nagaloka is very difficult to understand because it's in a different dimension. But the nature of it is very simple and very easy to understand. It's like Las Vegas. Nagaloka is just like Las Vegas, except without the hangovers. Because you never see the sun. and there's all kinds of treasures and jewels and sex and beautiful stuff and stores with fancy things. That's basically what it's like, but it's natural to the Naga. They're not overextending themselves or killing themselves to get it. And yes, you can be born there. Okay? Now, Deepankar Paul asks, what is the planetary combination that leads to atheism? Oh my. Atheism. Well, basically, atheism is what is it? Atheism, non-God system, a system without God, without God or gods, without divine powers, is atheistic. So, what kind of astrological symbols would depict an intellect which is atheistic, or a heart or an emotion which is atheistic? Well, it would be twofold. You can get to that place in two ways, and that's actually by a combination of the two that you really get to that place. One is by pragmatic, practical realism. You know, I pour water out of a cup, and I pour water out of a pitcher, it goes into a cup, and I put it in my mouth, and there's no God involved in it. And I can understand the flow of the water, and I can tell you everything, I can describe everything. Hell, I can even make water if you give me oxygen and hydrogen. And I can change the water ice. I can do everything. I don't need God. I don't need to pray. Because it's practical, it's real. So that's one avenue which is atheistic. So you'll see this in charts where Mercury is strong but under the influence of Saturn, and especially if it's also under the influence of Rahu. So see, Mercury's intellect and Saturn is very pragmatic and practical. So it won't want to include unnecessary things in its thought process. And God is mostly an unnecessary thing. You don't need God to turn on your car. You don't need, apparently, right? You just turn the key, it turns on, you make sure you have gas in the thing. So Saturn influenced Mercury works like that, which would be Mercury conjoined Saturn, Mercury aspected Saturn, Mercury and Saturn signs. Okay? But that in and of itself doesn't make necessarily an atheist, but it puts the intellect into a frame which is really practical, which tends to lead to atheism, or which can wind up with atheism. The other aspect of atheism is not liking to trust. Actually, maybe there's three ways to get there. The second part is not liking to trust in something that you can't immediately verify or see. It's kind of, this is maybe the same thing, but the other astrological part that's involved in this is Jupiter. So on one hand it's Saturn, and on the other hand it's Jupiter. Jupiter is the one that likes to trust in things that can't be verified, immediately identified and verified. Jupiter is waiting. The teacher told me this, and I believe that what the teacher said is true, so I will work on the assumption that it's true. That's how a student feels. And I'll do this experiment. The teacher said it's not going to blow up like an atomic bomb in my face, so I'll put these two chemicals together. Jupiter trusts the information that it gets. But Jupiter, under certain circumstances, like especially when aspected by Saturn or Rahu, influenced by Rahu, won't want to trust unpragmatic things. So this is atheism as the concept that God is really unnecessary to explain everything that you need to explain. You'll get there with Jupiter and Mercury being influenced by Saturn and Rahu. That's what it really boils down to. That's kind of like the philosophical atheism or the intellectual atheism. The other is the just sort of emotional atheism. The emotional atheism comes from two sources. One, it's by representatives of God having exploited or abused you. So that would be family, a senior family, and priests and things like that. Senior family, teachers, priests, people in that role of the superior. So you would see that by problems with, again, Jupiter and the sun. A problematic sun can certainly lead to a tendency to atheism, recourse to atheism. That's from the emotional side of it. The other part of the emotional side is a lot of ego. If there's a lot of ego, then one doesn't like the idea that there's somebody in control besides me. So that's, again, sun related. And maybe you can see Mars in there too. Alrighty. Hopefully that explains that question. Harmanjot Singh says, can traveling and settling in a foreign land change our destiny? If it does, so we cannot travel or settle abroad without specific... Alright, so let's call this relocation. Everything that you do changes your destiny. What is destiny in the first place? Please ask the questions that are important to ask before proceeding to the more complicated questions. What is destiny in the first place? Destiny is the required result of your action. You set some chain of events in motion, and then at some point you get repercussions from that. That's what destiny is. So therefore, whatever you do, whether it's relocate or pick your nose, it always is building and changing your future. That's one of the reasons why you cannot get 100% foolproof prediction from astrology, especially from, well, you could possibly, but you can't get it from a birth chart alone, and you can't get it from a human brain. And I don't even think, honestly, that it's 100% even for Brahma. So, does relocation specifically change your thing in the theory of, like, now I can have a relocated birth chart? I don't think that is very useful. I don't think that's a very valid technique, but I haven't thought about it terribly much, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is useful. You don't need to make a million comments now if you love it. It's okay. I'm not making a clear statement on it. But everything that you do affects your destiny. So why not? Yeah, of course a relocation would. What you need to do is, let's be practical instead of theoretical. What you really need to do is you look at yourself, look at your chart, you see what your weaknesses are, you see what your strengths are, and you put yourself in a condition where your strengths are favored and your weaknesses are fortified or protected, right? Somebody else in your life can make up the slack, or some situation will make up the slack, or you won't be exacerbated. Weaknesses won't be exacerbated. So that includes who you live with, where you live, etc. Like, if you're a very outgoing person, if you're a very outgoing female, for example, then you don't stay in Saudi Arabia and Iran. You don't. You need to relocate to be happy with that destiny. Okay? If you're a very introverted person, you don't stay in a loud-ass country. You go someplace quiet like Japan. And that puts you in harmony with your chart. It's not really about changing things. Everybody thinks, oh no, there's a problem and I need to change it. There's no problem that you need to change unless, that's atheism. That God is doing bad things and I need to fix it. There's no problem that you need to change. You just need to figure out what you're supposed to be doing and what you're supposed to be, and be it. The next question from ADS. How should one interpret the planet in the first house but above the ascendant? above ascendant. This is one of the things where you watch other astrologers talk about something and then you come and ask me about it. But I never talked about that, so why not ask the other astrologer that you heard about it from? Above the ascendant, below the ascendant, it's all in the first house. Technically speaking, if it's above the ascendant, it's more manifest than if it's below the ascendant. But I don't really care. My system doesn't really care about that. I don't think you need to go into that detail. This is just like I'm saying before with the destiny question. Why don't you ask the basic questions first, and then your advanced questions will be answered. So similarly, you don't need to go into hair-splitting astrological techniques. When you understand the basics correctly, you get all the answers you need from the chart. And the next question from Force Gamer. If Aries is defined by the spring equinox, so to speak, and Cancer would be when the sun. Please don't ask this question again. Okay, please. This is the question of... Actually, maybe there's some good questions in here. I mean, this is a good question. It's just that it's been asked 75 million times, and I've answered it 63 million times. If Aries is defined by the spring equinox, and Cancer is when the sun is at the highest point in the sky, why would Aries have to be in the spring of the northern hemisphere? It is not defined by the spring equinox. Aries is defined by the ascending equinox. Cancer is defined by the sun's most northerly point. It doesn't matter if you live in Antarctica or Alaska, the sun's most northerly point is when it reaches Cancer. And the sun's point coming over the equinox is when it enters Aries. Please try to understand that so that you can stop asking this question. Why is north considered up in any case? Is it the same problem applies to the moon's nodes? Why does north constitute up and south down? Exactly. It's just because those are the directions, X, Y, and Z. But I did cover this topic slightly in my astronomy book because it's relevant to there with Meru and the core of the Earth. The core of the Earth determines the directions. You need a point in space to make any sense out of directions because directions are relative, right? So this is why it gets confusing. If you use a word like up in relation to what? Like I'm on the second floor right now. My wife, maybe if she's still here, she's on the first floor. So up for her is down for me. So directions are relative to the observer. But the most key point in space for us as humans living on the planet Earth is the middle of the Earth, Meru. And the primary sense of directions is defined in relation to that. That's the primary reference point. The main subjective locus for our reality is Meru, the center of our world. And so up in relation to that is what we call Meru's north. Meru's up. And down in relation to that is Meru's south. Why is north up and south down? Why is down down and up up? These are words that we use for the directions. Because we live in 3 dimensions, so we have a X, a Y, and a Z axis. So there's a complicated sense to two ups. Because in 2-dimensional space, it's easy to understand X and Y axis. But what's the Z axis? So Meru's x-axis is pointing, it's the axis upon which the Earth rotates. That defines an up and a down. Then the W is this part that's rotating, the horizons. The Z is the connection between Meru and Bhagavata, between the Earth and the Sun. So that's another sense of up. But it's different than north. It's a secondary up. And that really depends upon the time of year and the location on the globe, exactly which way that would point. But it's still, relative to Meru, it always points towards the sun. So that's a secondary sense of up. So that can be confusing. Up and north can be confusing for two reasons. One is that there's two axes which can be described as up, both y and z, positive z and positive y. And that's the first reason why up and north can be a confusing concept. And the other reason is that we also use directions relative to things besides Meru. But in astronomy, and when we're talking about the relationship between the Earth and the Sun, which is the generator of the zodiac, when we talk about up, we're talking about Meru's up. Therefore, it doesn't matter if you live in Antarctica or if you live in Alaska. Up is up. And the Sun is highest up when it gets to 0 Cancer, and the Sun is furthest down when it gets to 0 Capricorn. I hope that answers the question. I forgot to change that because I got too excited about it. MS, Jupiter's aspect is said to be Amrit. I don't know why. Who says it? Let me change this. Again, you ask me these questions as if I said them. But I didn't say them. Maybe you should be more... if you can't ask good questions, you can't get good answers. I have to tell you these things, not because I'm an asshole, which is also the true. But the reason why I have to say these things is because you need to hear these things. You really need to hear these things. You can't get good answers without asking good questions. You can't ask a person about something they haven't said. You don't even know if they believe in it. So here you're saying Jupiter's aspect is said to be Amrit. I never said that Jupiter's aspect is Amrit. So what's the point of asking me? If you heard so-and-so say Jupiter's aspect is Amrit, then ask so-and-so what that means. So Venus is supposed to be Amrit. Shouldn't Venus's aspect be Amrit? Yeah, so why don't you ask the person who's saying that Jupiter's aspect is Amrit? What they probably mean is Jupiter is benefic, and so is Venus. Anyway, please ask them. Anish asks, what's the difference between a planet aspecting a house versus placed in the house? Let us update our title and call it Aspect versus Conjunction. And let me try to get it. Aspect versus conjunction. What's the difference between how long have we been doing this? Okay, I'm gonna be off soon. What's the difference? The difference basically is that when there's a conjunction, there's mutual effect, and when there's an aspect, in many cases, there's just one-way effect. Okay. Nathaniel, would you interpret a benefic in its own sign in 6, 8, or 12 versus a malefic in its own sign in those houses? Let's go back to 6, 8, and 12. I'm going to actually just stop writing the channels, writing the questions, because I want to finish it. Kind of catch up and finish it. So he's asking, is it better... Okay, 6th Lord in the 6th house is good for the 6th house. But is it good if it's a benefic Lord and a benefic... Like 6th house is Libra and Venus is there. Is that as good as if 6th house was Capricorn and Saturn was there? No, it's actually a little better if it's a malefic in the 6th, but this is not the case for 8 and 12. And you should hopefully know why, because malefics are better in 3, 6, 10, and 11. Jonathan asks, the existence of Atma implies the existence of Paramatma. If Paramatma exists, does that necessitate the existence of Atma? Yes, otherwise what's the point? What's the meaning of Param? The sun doesn't exist without sun rays. Black Swan Experience, what is your take on looking at the afterlife in a natal chart? Boy, I think we just did that last week at this time. Like literally exactly 1 week ago. So go to my channel and look on the past live streams and go to the like one right before this one, and it's literally about Paladipika talking about looking at past life and future life from the birth chart. Chio Valencia, thank you. Oh, look at that. Are we almost done? Can Purva Bhadra Nakshatra lend itself to addiction? Purva Bhadrapada lend itself to addiction? What's addiction? Addiction is caused by excessive need for something. An intensity, a need for intensity can also be there for addictive behavior. Addictive behavior is a symptom that can be produced from many different causes. One of the causes is from like a neediness or a weakness. So that would not be associated with Purva Bhadrapada. But another avenue to get to behavior that presents as addictive behavior is intensity, where conventional experiences do not cut the mustard, and you keep needing more and more and more. Purva Bhadrapada can lead to that. All right, so I think that's everything. We covered everything. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think maybe I scared away the questions towards the end, but that's good. I like to be scary. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Please realize that the previous live streams exist still, and you can watch the recordings of them as well as these just by visiting the channel page, which you can get by like clicking on the part where it shows my face and says Victor Kara's Astrology. And there's the Discord. Maybe Jonathan can put a link to the Discord in the chat. And I have my book, which just came out, which is the astronomy book. And you can find that and all those things from victorkara.com. Thank you very much.